It never stopped. That was how a private of the Imperial Japanese Army described it years later. Not as explosions, not as shells, but as something eternal, a sound without breath. On June 15, 1944, just after dawn, the sea off Saipan began to glow, not with sunrise, but with muzzle flash. Battleships of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, USS Tennessee, USS California, USS Maryland, opened fire in sequence, their 14-inch guns recoiling like slow mechanical animals. The concussion rolled inland before the shells arrived. Japanese infantry dug into coral ridges felt the pressure in their sinuses first, a squeezing sensation, as if the air itself were being wrung out. By 0700 hours, more than 165,000 shells would be fired in the opening days of the Saipan bombardment. To the men of the 43rd Infantry Division Imperial Japanese Army, it felt less like preparation for invasion and more like the end of the island itself. The sound did not rise and fall. It layered. Battleship guns boomed at 30-second intervals. Cruisers stitched the hills with rapid fire. Destroyers crept close enough that sailors could see palm trunks snapping, firing 5-inch shells point-blank into caves. When naval guns paused, carrier aircraft took over. SBD Dauntless dive bombers screaming down through their own exhaust trails, dropping 1,000-pound bombs that slammed into limestone and turned it to chalk dust. Inside the Japanese positions, men waited. Private First Class Hiroshi Tanaka, 21 years old, formerly a rice clerk from Niagara, crouched in a shallow bunker reinforced with timber scavenged from a sugar plantation. His steel helmet rattled with each impact. Dust sifted down continuously, coating his eyelashes, sticking to sweat until his face felt crusted and immobile. He pressed his fingers into his ears, not to block the noise, that was impossible, but to keep the feeling that his skull might split open. Japanese doctrine had taught him many things: night infiltration, bonsai charges, the virtue of dying without surrender. It had not prepared him for artillery that did not relocate, did not rest, did not run out of ammunition. On Tarawa in November 1943, Japanese defenders had already encountered American naval gunfire, but there the bombardment was brief, inaccurate, and followed by immediate landing. Saipan was different. Here, the firing continued hour after hour, day after day, adjusting with aerial spotting. Each shell was walked closer. Each pause was followed by correction, not silence. At Aslito Airfield, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding the 43rd Division, listened to reports in a concrete command post. Telephone lines failed repeatedly, severed by shockwaves. Runners arrived bleeding from ears and noses, mouths opening and closing without sound. Saito had fought in China. He had endured Soviet artillery at Nomonhan. None of it resembled this. American naval gunfire was not just destructive, it was systematic. Forward observers from the 4th Marine Division radioed coordinates from ships offshore. When infantry advanced, destroyers adjusted fire in increments of 50 yards. The Japanese had no equivalent response. Their coastal guns were buried deep, their ammunition limited, their fire quickly suppressed by counter-battery barrages. For the men in the caves above Charin Kanoa, time lost meaning. Noon felt like dawn. Dusk felt identical to morning. The sky was either smoke white or flame orange. The smell never changed: pulverized coral, burned vegetation, cordite. When it rained, the water ran chalky, turning trenches into caustic slurry that ate its skin and cloth. Some soldiers began to believe the Americans could see through rock. Corporal Masao Ishikawa, a machine gunner, later recalled pressing his forehead into the cool stone of a cave wall, whispering the names of his parents as shells walked closer. Each impact lifted his body slightly, as if the ground were breathing under him. He was not afraid of dying, he said. He was afraid of being buried alive, pinned beneath collapsed stone, while the noise continued forever. That fear was not unfounded. Naval gunfire did not merely kill, it reshaped terrain. Entire cave systems collapsed, entrances sealed. Men survived initial blasts only to suffocate in darkness, fingers bleeding from clawing at rubble, while the bombardment above never acknowledged them. On June 18th, as Marines pushed inland, destroyers fired continuous support missions for over 8 hours without interruption. Gun crews rotated to prevent exhaustion. Ammunition hoists clanged endlessly. On the bridge of USS Brain, officers tracked fire missions with clinical precision, calling out bearings while sailors below wiped sweat and powder residue from their faces. For the Japanese infantry, this precision felt supernatural. They had been told Americans were soft, over-reliant on machines, unwilling to endure hardship. Yet here was an enemy who allowed steel and fire to suffer in his place, who reduced hills before climbing them, who brought the ocean's weight ashore. Psychological collapse began before physical defeat. Men stopped eating, not from lack of rations, but because chewing felt obscene while the earth was being dismantled. Some sat rocking, repeating sutras. Others begged officers for permission to charge, not out of courage but desperation, to escape the noise by running toward its source. On June 22nd, a Japanese counterattack was ordered near Mount Tapachau. Survivors emerged from caves at dusk, rifles slick with condensation, uniforms stiff with dust and blood. They advanced only a few hundred yards before naval flares ignited overhead, turning night into surgical white daylight. Seconds later, offshore guns reopened. The attack dissolved into fragments, bodies lifted and thrown like broken tools. By early July, Saipan was lost. In the final days, as Japanese resistance collapsed toward Marpi Point, naval gunfire continued, not in fury but in restraint, striking specific coordinates to prevent escape. When the firing finally stopped, the silence was so sudden it caused dizziness. Some soldiers staggered, disoriented, unsure whether the war had ended or their hearing had failed completely. Many later reported phantom thunder for years afterward, a distant boom that returned in dreams, in quiet rooms, in moments of stillness. The Japanese army entered the Pacific War believing courage and endurance could balance material disadvantage. On islands like Saipan, that belief was shattered not by infantry alone, but by a form of warfare that did not demand hatred or bravery, only range tables, logistics, and patience. For the men under the bombardment, it felt like facing an enemy that never blinked. The ocean had learned to speak, and it spoke without pause.